What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be breaking down the best settings you need to be using in Apex Legends, from gameplay settings, sensitivities, ways to improve your FPS, and even if advanced look controls are worth using. There's some new settings for us to look at since the last iteration of this video, and I've also taken into account pro player settings, plus of course my thousands of hours of in-game experience. Lots to talk about, so let's get right to it. We're going to kick it off with the gameplay tab, and first up we got interact prompt style. I have as compact. Some players, if you are new, I would recommend you use default. Basically, when you go up to stuff, it's going to tell you a little bit more information as to what you are picking up. I like compact because there's less stuff on screen. It makes my visuals a little bit more clear. Button hinge I leave as on. This is just going to basically tell you on the bottom of your screen what button you got to press to activate that ability. Crosshair damage feedback I actually have as off. I used to have X with shield icon or even just X, but since you are shooting players and the damage number is popping up, that is kind of my damage feedback as to whether or not I am hitting my target. So I don't need the extra clutter of the X to be popping up on my screen. I find that's just not needed, and it does cause a little bit more visual clutter on my screen. Damage numbers, I'm going to do stacking. You definitely don't want to have it as off. You could have it as floating or both. Both I again find it's just too much clutter. I don't want both those numbers popping up. I just care what the total damage number I am doing is. Enemy health bar, of course you're going to want to have this on. This is a semi-new one. You will want to be seeing what you are damaging enemies for. Ping capacity I have as faded. I did have it as default for a long time, but overall I like having it a little bit more faded so it's not kind of blocking enemies if I am looking at the ping. Enemy highlight I have as enabled. This is just going to help you see enemies if they are within a certain amount of range. Obituaries, you want this as on. This is your kill feed. Mini map rotation, I prefer to have it as off. Some people like it on. I want north always to be on the top of my screen, so this kind of helps orient myself into what direction I am looking. Of course, you do have the compass on the top middle of your screen as well, but for me, I like to have mini map rotation off. Weapon auto cycle on empty, so when you run out of ammo, it's just going to swap your gun right away for you. I used to have this as off. I do have this as on now. It just makes it a little bit more simple. When I run out of ammo, if I am hitting that empty of the mag, I'm going to instantly swap weapons, and I don't have the way for me to press the button. Always sprint. If you're a controller warrior, I think you should have this as on, and maybe even if you are a mouse and key as well, but basically you're just going to always be sprinting when you are moving. I basically find that for controller warriors, at least if you have this as on, it's going to help save your left stick a little bit, so you're not clicking in as hard. You don't have to do a double click or anything like that. You're just going to always be sprinting as soon as you move your stick. Auto run I have as off. I don't want this as on because again, I want to have a little bit more control over my character. Jetpack glide control I have as hold. Now if you're not a paddle user, I am a pro controller user or a paddle user, so I have this as hold, but if you're not, you may want to have toggle because you could have a hard time activating Valkyrie's jetpack and maneuvering around at the same time. It kind of requires you to play claw if you don't have paddles. Otherwise, you are just going to struggle a little bit. There's button combinations that you can do when we get to controller settings, which we will talk about as well. But for most people, I would have this as hold. It just feels a little bit more intuitive to just hold down when I am trying to go upwards and let go when I do want to fall down with Valkyrie's jetpack. Incoming damage feedback, I leave this as 3D, just gives me a little bit more information as to where I'm getting hit from. Taking damage closes death box or crafting menu. This is the big one. You definitely want to have this as off. If you're in death box, you're trying to get that last minute armor swap, and you do get shot, you're going to get ripped out of it right before you get it. Leave this as off. You should not have this as on. Health and ammo pop-ups, this is another one that is pretty new. I am going to have this as limited. You could have this as off if you don't want any sort of information to come on your screen when you are low ammo or you are low health. I like to have this as limited, so it's still going to pop up if I am critically wounded or critically low on ammo, but for the most part, you don't need to have this as on. It's just kind of giving you more information too soon. I like to have it as limited. Health and ammo voice lines, if you are new to the game, you may want to have this on. This will basically just tell you when you are low ammo or when you run out or when you are low health. I like to have this as off because I know when I'm low health, I don't need the game to tell me. I don't need my character to speak. My character speaking, I might miss some sort of audio in game, so I do have this as off. Arsenal maps and HUD icons, I like to have this as maximum. You could do moderate if you do want to have less arsenal information on your screen, but this is new to season 24 if you are unaware. Basically, whenever you're looking at the map, I want to see what arsenals are at each POI in that general area, so I have this as maximum. I don't think this is too big of a deal though, so I would just leave this as is. On-screen portraits I have as on. I just want to see what characters are around me, so I do leave this on. Hop-up pop-ups I have as on. This is basically just going to tell you what hop-up is equipped to your gun when you do pull the gun out. Moving on, streamer mode I have as off. I'm not a big streamer, so I don't really need to worry about this. Anonymous mode I have as disabled. Again, I'm not a big streamer or content creator like that, so I don't need to have this as enabled. Usage sharing I do have as enabled. This is just going to send data to EA for various things. I just don't care if EA gets my data, so I just leave this as on. Performance display I sometimes turn off, but generally for all the masses out there, for all of you watching this video, you should have this as on. You're going to want to know what your frame rate is and if you are lagging, so I would leave this as on. I will sometimes have this as off so my screen is a little bit more clear and less cluttered when I am recording videos. Communication filter, I have this this as everybody. Tutorial systems I have as on. Honestly, this doesn't really matter. This is a fairly new one as well. You could have this as off if you are very experienced with, but I have just been leaving this on for now. Reticle and laser sight, I do the same thing. I do this very nice lime green. I'm doing 12, 255, and 12. If you are looking to copy this color, it provides a very nice and simple kind of lime green dot, and I find lime green just isn't really on a lot of the maps. It's a very good contrasting dot for you to use, so I do recommend this. Don't want to use lime green, you could look at yellow, although yellow sometimes fades when you are in bright areas, and pink I think is another really good one as well. So for me, 12, 255, 12, lime green. And finishing up the gameplay tab, we do have the accessibility, and all of these will really depend on what your needs are. For me, I don't need any of the accessibility stuff. I generally recommend that you do not have subtitles on unless, again, you need them, but you don't want more stuff popping up on your screen like voice lines when you are in fights. It's, again, just gonna clutter your screen, and the less stuff you have on your screen, the better, in my opinion, you will be at the game. Mouse and keyboard, I am not an MnK warrior, but I will just mention a couple things that you might want to look at. I do have jump bound to scroll wheel, which is pretty nice to help you kind of do some tap strafes and other things, but again, I don't really play mouse and keyboard. I would recommend that you go look at like someone like Daz or someone like that who does play MnK if you are looking for MnK specific settings. Before we get to the controller tab, which we have a ton to break down, I will just say if you have any questions, drop a comment down below. Do me a favor and hit the like button, and if you have any other questions or if you do want to party up with other players, because playing solo and with friends is absolutely terrible, you can hop into my community Discord. I would love to have you in there, and I am pretty active in there as well. For controller, this is a big one. I've spent thousands of hours in game trying to perfect this, plus looking at what pro players are using, so let's break this down. Right off the rip, we do have a few things to mention about the button layout. Button puncher is the one that I have always done, and again, like I said earlier, I am a paddle player. But button puncher for me is simply just swapping crouch and melee, so when I do accidentally hit in that right stick, I'm not going to accidentally punch. I used to do this a lot. I hold my controllers pretty hard. Otherwise, if you are not a paddle player, so if you're looking to get the full movement possible, I usually recommend Evolve. Evolve means you can jump with the left bumper, crouch with the right stick, you can have full control over your movements, and you're not going to have to worry about kind of taking your right thumb off of that right stick to aim and hit buttons and jump and all that. So you can do full movement, full aim with Evolve. This is the one I recommend that you use. Otherwise, you could look at some things like customizing it, but I just don't think customize is really necessary. If you're accidentally meleeing, do button puncher. Otherwise, keep it really simple and don't swap your settings too often. Stick layout, I do default, interact, reload. You're gonna want to do tap to use and tap to reload. I've gone over it a couple times where tap to use, maybe hold to reload, but it's just not intuitive enough, and same thing with hold to use and tap to reload. You want to be able to tap both, and there's a lot of things you can do. Like if you're on a doorway and you're trying to tap to reload, you can kind of just look away from the door, or you can just empty your magazine and you will start to reload. So tap to use, tap to reload, I find this is gonna be the best. Crash button, I do as hold. If you have it as toggle, I find bunny hopping is a little bit harder. So if I do have it as hold, I can kind of just bunny hop a little bit easier. And this is something I've done for years. So I do recommend that crouch as hold and not toggle. But again, if you're not really bunny hopping, if you're not overly concerned with your movement, you could just do toggle. Aim button, hold, pretty self-explanatory. Survival slot button, you're gonna want this as on. I do have it as on. Adaptive triggers, I have as off. I don't use a PS5 controller, so I do have adaptive triggers as off. Trigger dead zones, I have as none. It's gonna be defaulted as default, which is like a small trigger dead zone. I don't really think that's necessary. I think you can just have the trigger dead zone as off. If your gun is firing on its own, then you could do default. Menu cursor speed, I generally recommend you have around half, maybe a little bit more. You want this to be as high as possible within your ability to control it. So if you have it too slow, then basically when you go into armor swap something, it's just gonna be too slow. It's gonna be too slow to loot and that type of deal. So you want to have this as fast as you possibly can within your ability to control it. If it's too fast, then you're gonna be misclicking and it's gonna take you more time as well. So somewhere around half, maybe just a little bit higher. Now for the big one, movement and aiming. Now I do 4-3 linear. If you are generally new to the game, you might want to try 4-3 classic, 4-4 classic. Classic is a little bit more of a simple curve where it's going to start to ramp up the more you look, and you got a little bit more fine tuning at longer ranges. But linear has been pretty much determined as the best sensitivity if you are looking to go at the top of the game. Linear is going to help you one mag players in close range. You could do 4-4, you could do 4-3. It's pretty much a requirement, in my opinion, that you have small look dead zone. If you have large look dead zone, this is going to handicap you a lot. But you will have stick drift if you do have no dead zone with linear. So I like to do default just so I don't have to always kind of center my cursor. Either way though, 4-3 linear is what I recommend. And per optic settings kind of goes up to what you want to use. But for me, I always use the default ones at the ones I'm using pretty often. This is 1, 2, and 3 X's. If I am getting 4 and those higher zooms, I find that they're a little bit too slow. so I do bump these up to 4 and very high. It just helps me kind of aim at longer ranges. It's just something that I like, but this will be up to your personal preference. My apologies if I'm going through this pretty fast. I don't want to waste your guys' time, but movement dead zone you can't do as small. This again, if you have like left stick drift and you're automatically walking, you could have this as large. This one's not as big of a deal, so generally small should be fine though. The look dead zone though, if you have small and you are getting stick drift, you probably got to look at a new controller, unfortunately. So inverted look I have as off. Vibration I have always done as off. In my about 26, 27 years of playing FPS games, I have always had this as off. I find that if my hands are shaking, generally, it's gonna kind of affect my aim. Now, is it really gonna be a big deal? Probably not. Some people like to have the feedback. I don't need the feedback to understand that I'm getting shot at. I know if I'm getting hit, I know if I'm taking damage. I don't want my hands shaking. I also think that it's gonna make your controller last a little bit longer if all those parts in the controller are not shaking as well. So, vibration I have as off. Now, advanced look controls, it's pretty much been determined that advanced look controls is really not the best way. It messes with your aim assist a little bit. It's not quite as good as just using the default one, but if you are looking to test things out, I'll give you a quick breakdown as to how advanced look controls should be set up. First and foremost, dead zone should be as low as possible within your ability to not have stick drift. For me, it's around 3 to 5%. An outer threshold, again, you're gonna want to have this as low as possible, so you want this to be all the way down as 1. Basically, this is gonna give you more kind of finessing with your movement. So if you have this all the way up, you'll see that you're gonna hit the outer threshold of your movement faster, and you're not gonna be able to control yourself quite as easily. Did have this all the way down. Response curve, this is kind of gonna depend if you want a classic feel, which this is kind of like a more classic feel on screen now. If you want a more linear feel, you can drop this all the way down to 0. If you want something that ramps up really fast, you can bump this all the way up. I just don't see why you'd want that, but for me, you're probably gonna want something closer to linear, which is somewhere around 0 to like 5, 4, something like that. So keep that in mind. Per optic settings are mostly the same from what I just talked about, but I kind of do more default per optic settings on the 1, 2, and 3x, and then on the 4 to the sear passive, I'm doing those a little bit higher. I don't have these set because I don't really use advanced look control, so you will have to fine tune these. It is nice that they give you a 1.0, 1.1, 1.2 kind of breakdown of it, so you do have a little bit more customization there. Yaw speed, turning speed, and all this is basically just how fast you can look left, right, up, and down. So generally, I will say you should have no ramp up. Ramp up is gonna kind of like the more you turn left, the more you turn right, the more you turn up, the longer you are holding that input, the faster and the more it's gonna ramp up and start to turn. I don't think ramp up is good. I want my movement to be 1-to-1. I want my movement to be very consistent when I am pressing it. So when I know I'm pressing my stick all the way to the left, it's gonna move at the same speed all the time. It's not gonna give me a ramp up. So generally, I'm gonna recommend that you have your yaw speed and pitch speed a little bit different, but basically yaw is left and right, pitch is up and down. You're gonna be looking left and right more than you are gonna be looking up and down. If you look at it this way, it's just kind of a simple math. You do have to do a 180-degree turn to turn all the way around, whereas if you're gonna look up and down, it's only 90 degrees to look straight up. I do something like 180 to 130, 140. That's usually what I do when I was using advanced look controls, but again, have all these ramp ups all the way down. And it's the same thing for ADS yaw, ADS pitch, and then ADS extra turning. I like to have these all the way down. I don't think it's necessary. And I am doing something like 130 and 80 or 90 around for the ADS yaw and ADS pitch speed. Target compensation, this is going to be your aim assist. You're going to want this on. And melee target compensation, this is your melee aim assist. You're going to want this on as well. Moving on to the video tab, if you are looking to get a boost in your FPS, I do have a few things I will recommend here. But first off, if you want the most FPS out of your game, you're going to want to have it as full screen. This has just always been a thing. I like to have borderless window because I am tabbing out all the time. If I'm making videos, taking notes, I don't want to have the kind of tab out and it be a little bit slower. So I like to have borderless window. Aspect ratio and resolution is going to be highly dependent on your monitor. So I'm doing 16:9 and obviously 2560 by 1440. I am rocking 1440p. Brightness again is going to depend on your monitor. I just leave it in the middle. Field of view for me, I've always done 104 in my FPS games. It's not to the point where it's too high or it's making things too small. It's also not something like 80 or 70 where it's going to be way too bumped in. Honestly, if you have anything lower than 80, it's going to be just punched in way too much and you're not going to want this. You're just not going to be able to see enough around you. I usually do 104. As long as it's over 90, you're going to be good. FOV ability scaling, I have this as disabled. Basically, anytime I use an ability that changes my FOV, like an Octane Stim, I don't want this to happen. So my FOV is consistent all the time. So I do have this as disabled. Sprint view shake, I want this as minimal as well. I don't want more stuff shaking. Screen clutter, we've kind of gone over this a lot, but less stuff that's popping up on your screen and your screen shaking is going to be good. Now, again, all this stuff is going to be highly dependent on your PC system specs. For me, I'm rocking a 4090 and a 7950X. I got a very good computer because I edit my videos and do all that thing. So this will highly depend on what you have. I have everything as on ultra or high because I want my game to look good for the videos that I am recording. But overall, if you are looking to get increased FPS usage, there's a few things that you should look at. And the big one is you're gonna want to turn down textures. Having a more flat surface is gonna greatly increase your FPS. Besides that, anything with shadows, you can turn that down. It doesn't really affect the way the game looks that much, and it's gonna give you a pretty big performance boost. So turn your textures down, turn your shadows down, and you will get a lot more FPS than having them up too high. As for audio, this is something that a lot of people kind of overlook, but audio is a pretty big deal. So starting at the top, I got my master volume at 100, and then I'm just doing default for the device and configuration over here. As for the voice chat, do not do open mic, do push to talk. If you're open micing, no one wants to hear you eating your chips or kind of yelling at the TV screen. So do push to talk, do everyone a favor. I keep my incoming voice chat pretty low. I don't want my teammates call outs kind of being too loud to the point where I can't hear what's happening in game. Then for the general gameplay settings, I have my sound effects at 100. I want to hear all those footsteps, the gunshots, and all that stuff. Dialogue volume, I'm leaving at 50. I don't want dialogue to be overshadowing what is actually happening in game. Music and lobby music, I have at 20. And then gameplay volume and spectating, I have around 40. So it is a little bit quieter than it is when I am just playing the game. Otherwise, emote preview sound and sound and background, I just leave as on. You don't really got to worry about those. So that is my Apex Legends best settings. Let me know if this is super helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment down below. As always, happy gaming, Legends, and I'll see you in the next one.